Italian to to um, uh, to Frank
Yeah,
Sinatra.
I've seen it. Oh my God, is it ever funny?
I know it's
He,
that was a great show, the Johnny Carson show.
it
Um,
sure
uh,
was. And Rickles was a
and
comic genius. I remember him roasting Reagan. And went to Dean Martin celebrity roasts.
right,
God,
right, yeah.
he was fearless. He didn't care. He looked over at one point at Reagan and said, "Hey, hey, don't you be laughing. It's my people put you here." He'd just become president, right? The whole place. Just he had Lauren Green and a whole bunch of other people up on the stage, and he didn't care.
Oh no, no, that was back in the days where Herman Cain, when Herman Cain was running for the Republican nomination a couple of electoral cycles ago in the United States, and there was a question about people being insulted by all kinds of stuff, and Herman Cain, who was as forgive me, nobody should be offended by this, but Herman Cain was about as black as they come from a purely skin color point of view. Okay, and and his response was, you know what? I think Americans need to have a sense of humor.
I think he's right.
Everybody's offended by everything today, but back in those days, okay, you just and nobody. The reason nobody got offended by Don Rickles is because they understood it was just comedy. It's just satire. He's just making you laugh. Okay, it's funny. He's
And
making
he
racial jokes.
nailed
Yeah,
everybody. He didn't care. Like it wasn't like he was picking on one
that's
group.
that's right.
He
He
would go
wasn't.
after
He
you name
didn't.
it, man.
He didn't discriminate.
No, he did not discriminate. There was a lot of things. Like I watched him go after Clint Eastwood once after they made Kelly's Heroes. He said, "Kelly, we made this movie 20 years ago. No phone call. What's up?" And the place, what's his name? Not Kelly, Clint. Clint, we made that movie 20 years ago. No phone call. Hey, your people call my people. And the whole Clint Eastwood was just laughing. He just about falls out of his chair.
Yeah. Anyway,
Oh, man. That was my favorite, all-time favorite movie was Kelly's Heroes.
I knew that, Nick.
Yep. A deal. What do you mean a deal? You know, maybe the guy's a Republican. Anyway, yeah, I don't want to give away any of the movie if somebody hasn't seen it yet, but go watch Kelly's Heroes. Anyway, that's
Okay.
not what we're supposed to be talking about.
No, so no, we have to be talking about something. Well, I was going to say serious, but how serious can you be? Hey, looking at the polls, looking at what's happening now. Here we are, less than a week away from the federal election. I still think I'm not gonna. I'm not gonna call it because the polls are just too tight and anything could happen. But but it's beginning to look like the conservatives probably peaked a little early, and the liberals probably cratered a little early. So we've seen some downward movement now of the conservatives, some upward movement of the liberals, and it's beginning to look like the liberals could pull this out, and we could have another liberal minority government.
Well, we'll have to see because there's a book out by a certain particular woman who has, is the right term, axe to grind? This is Jody Wilson-Raybould's expose on her life as Attorney General for Canada under Justin Trudeau. And they start the article. It's in the National Post today. It's only 15 hours old. Let's see. The quote they lead with is, "I wish I had never met you," Wilson-Raybould told Trudeau, she reveals in her new book. Wilson-Raybould says she's mad at herself now for having once thought Trudeau was an honest and good person when in truth he would so casually lie to the public. Okay, now, look, I don't know how many people are going to get a chance to read this before the election, but from a political point of view, the timing is awful for Trudeau because I think that Jody Wilson has a lot of political capital with the Canadian public because she would not bend to what Trudeau wanted and went down swinging. She lost her job, but she did it for the right reasons. And I'm hoping that people will remember that when it comes time to step into that ballot box. Because if your attorney general doesn't think the prime minister is honest and casually lies to the Canadian public, that's got to have an impact. How could it not have? So we'll have to see.
Well, the answer to your question, how could it not have, I think is very simple. I think that Canadians, as with most voters in the Western world, are just cynical. And I think that they look at politicians and they just assume that they're not telling them the truth, or if they're telling them the truth, they're telling it in such a way that it's meant to elicit a certain response, or evoke a certain response. So it's truth with spin on it, and so there's no such thing anymore as the unvarnished truth. And I'm going to go back to one of my favorite historical characters, of course, Winston Churchill, and here is a person during the war years who bent over backwards to not present a rosy picture to his countrymen. At every opportunity, while he expressed complete confidence that that they, and eventually the Allies, when the Americans got into the war, alongside with the British and the rest of us, because don't forget that Canada was in the war long before the Americans were,
Yeah,
and
that's true.
so it's just worth reminding Canadians of that little tidbit of history that they probably don't know anymore. So Churchill wanted to continue to convey an absolute confidence in the outcome of the war. But while he was doing that, he never sugarcoated it. He would always say, we're ultimately going to win, but I'm not going to lie to you. I'm paraphrasing, of course. I'm
Yeah,
not going
that's
to
right.
lie to you. It's going to be long. It's going to be hard. There are going to be many, many setbacks. We're going, there are going to be disasters. It's going to be painful, and words to that effect over and over again. So it was sort of like, we're going to win, but we're in deep doo doo here,
It's going to hurt.
and these guys are going to hurt us. They're not going to beat us. But while we're in the business of putting together a coalition that ultimately is going to win this war, these guys are going to hurt us. And I'm not going to sugarcoat it. I'm not going to. And so one might say that he brought practiced honesty to a degree that could even be said to border on the obscene. Like, he exaggerated from time to time,
Yeah, but look, I'm not making any excuses for modern politicians, but Winston Churchill was one of a kind. And he really didn't fear anything. He didn't fear a political opponent. He didn't fear public opinion. He would win and lose races throughout his career, and he just kept coming back. And I think that's what finally endeared him to the level it was, that he was the leader required to lead until the Americans got involved, the Western world in this strike, in this fight against tyranny across the channel. So today, though, when you look at that, I won't say she's not Winston Churchill by any stretch, but there's a little bit of a tinge of that in what she's done. And I think people, whether they recognize Churchillian influence or not, they like it when people stand up for what they believe in and are willing to fall on their own sword for it, rather than just go along to get along. There is certainly a large amount of people who are disingenuous and or not disingenuous, but just jaded and, cynical. But I think deep down inside, when people step into that ballot box, they have some really serious conversations with themselves, and I'm hoping that this is part of it. What did he do to her? What did she do to deserve it, other than insist that they follow the law? And that's what I hope. One of the big challenges that Trudeau's going to have to overcome if he's going to win this thing is the answer to that question.
Well, here's the thing, Nick. I'm not entirely sure that people care that much. I didn't think you'll recall we had these discussions about this when it was happening. We're talking here about the SNC Lavalin scandal.
Yep.
And we talked at length about this, both on and off the air. And at the time, people were saying, "Oh, this is it. The Trudeau government is finished. Trudeau's going to have to resign." Blah 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 blah. And you'll recall that I was one of the few people out there saying, "You know what? This is going to blow over. Give it a little bit of time. People are going to move on to the next crisis, the next issue. Trudeau's going to survive this," and ultimately he did. And ultimately, unless something happens in the next the next few days, ultimately, he's going to survive again. It's beginning to look like. Now, the point I'm making is, I don't know that people really care that much. I think that people have become so jaded, so cynical when it comes to politics that they don't care. They almost expect the silliness and the dishonesty and the mudslinging, etc. And they tune it out. It doesn't have the same effect on voters as it might have at some point in time in the past.
I really hope you're wrong. I do know that history has proven you right in the past, but here's me being optimistic.
Yeah. Well, and why not be modern, wokish Canadian and just say, who cares about history?
Yeah, well, you know what? In the conversations I've had in the last few weeks, without tipping my hand about my position about this, I've been trying to get a read on. Now, granted, this isn't the biggest community in the world, but it was also true before I moved up here, too. I would run into person after person after person, all across, all the way from Killaloe up through Thunder Bay, up to here, who would say, he's got to go. He's got to go. And I know it's a very small sample. It's anecdotal. It's not scientific. That's just the people I happen to run into. And so I'm not trying to give that any more weight than it deserves, but I'm just saying that I sense an undercurrent here that maybe things are a little bit different this time because he's gone just a little too far. And I'm hoping that that's what's the situation.
Maybe, and plus, remember, if the polls have been shifting somewhat over the past week, more favorable to the Liberals than the Conservatives, but how many people already voted that maybe would be changing their minds and would vote a different way? So, it's not possible to measure that. I suppose it is, but it's complicated, and it's expensive to do that kind of polling to reach a large enough sample size of those people who've already voted. In order to see what the effect of their vote is going to have come September 20th. So it's possible that the Conservatives could still pull this out. And the polls are close enough that it's really not possible to predict who's going to win and who's not going to win. But that in itself is quite astonishing when you think about it. Because, going back and looking at the record of this government, I have a friend who was born and raised in Somalia, came of age in Somalia, ended up finding his way to Canada with his wife, and they're just lovely, lovely people. And he was talking to me just the other night, and he was saying, these guys have to go. And I'm going, which guys? And saying the Liberal government and Trudeau. He said, I know, I'm from Somalia. I know corruption. I know corrupt governments. And he said